them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get enough.
Okay, so you sent us some really compelling material this week. It's focusing on something many have been, well, hoping for, I suppose, but cautiously. These first direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in what, over 3 years now?
Yeah, it certainly feels significant after so much devastation and time. Just having negotiators in the same room again.
Yeah.
It's a step, regardless of, what we expect to come out of it immediately.
Right. Okay, let's dig into this then. The setting, as our sources lay it out, is pretty evocative. A palace in Istanbul, today's date, May 16th, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And what jumps out immediately is the pressure behind these talks. U.S. President Donald Trump is clearly pushing hard to end what's being called Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II.
That adds a whole other layer, doesn't it? Trump's involvement. You have to wonder about the motivations there. Is it purely about stopping the fighting, or is there like a legacy play or even domestic politics involved?
Yeah, good point. International players, they always have complex reasons, right?
Absolutely. It's probably a mix of things. Understanding those external pressures is, I think, pretty key to seeing the whole picture here.
So for this deep dive, our mission, really, is to try and cut through all the noise surrounding this Istanbul meeting. Figure out who the key people are in these initial talks. What are they actually saying? Their stated position.
Now, what's the vibe? Cautious optimism, deep skepticism.
Exactly. We want to get to the core of it without getting totally overwhelmed by every single detail flying around.
Right. Just grasp the basic shape of this diplomatic attempt, the starting lines, the aims, and, well, the obvious difficulties both sides are bringing.
Okay, let's start with the meeting itself. There was that visual detail that really struck me. The Ukrainian delegation turning up in camouflage fatigues, while the Russians were in suits. It's a small thing, maybe, but it feels almost symbolic, doesn't it? Like a visual shorthand for just how far apart they are right now.
It really is a stark contrast. And in diplomacy, these visual cues, even clothing, they can carry weight. They reflect the reality on the ground, maybe send a message.
Yeah. And then we had the opening remarks from Turkey's foreign minister, Hakan Fidan. He's chairing these initial talks.
Right.
He stressed the urgent need for a ceasefire, obviously, and sounded hopeful that, maybe these talks could pave the way for leader-level discussions down the line.
He used that metaphor, didn't he, about the two paths?
Yeah, the two paths, peace or, more destruction, a very direct appeal. It also highlights Turkey's role here as a mediator.
Well, Turkey's in a unique spot, isn't it? They have ties with both Russia and Ukraine, historical, economic.
Do you think that gives them actual leverage, though?
It gives them plausibility as a host, definitely. Their geography, their relationships. They have a stake in regional stability, too. So, yeah, potential leverage maybe, but it's complicated.
And it's just, wow, it's a stark reminder that the last time officials from both sides met face-to-face like this was way back in March 2022.
Right after the full-scale invasion began.
Yeah, that's a huge gap. Over 3 years with no direct talks.
It really is. And that long silence, it just underscores how deep the hostility runs, how massive the obstacles are. Just getting them back in a room, even at this level, it's notable. Preliminary, but notable.
Okay, so let's talk about the expectations, which honestly seem to be universally described as low.
Very low, yeah.
And the sources point to a couple of big reasons. First, President Trump himself has said publicly he doesn't see any real movement happening unless he meets directly with Putin.
Right. That kind of puts a damper on these Istanbul talks from the get-go, doesn't it?
It almost feels like it preempts the outcome. Like nothing significant can really happen here because the main event, in his view, is somewhere else.
It definitely injects skepticism. And it suggests the Trump administration might see a different path, a leader-to-leader path, as the only one that truly matters for a breakthrough.
We also have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's actually in Istanbul.
On the ground.
And he's echoing those low expectations. He specifically mentioned the level of the negotiating teams as, a reason not to expect too much. Though he did add that little bit, I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, that caveat.
Is that maybe a strategy?
Yeah.
Keep expectations low so any tiny bit of progress looks like a win?
Could be. Managing expectations is part of diplomacy. It lowers the pressure, allows for maybe more exploratory talks without the demand for instant results, and the level of the delegation.
Yeah, that often signals the initial scope and ambition or lack thereof.
And interestingly, Keith Kellogg, who's Trump's Ukraine envoy, he's there too.
Right.
So it seems like the U.S. has, I don't know, multiple people watching closely, even if they're downplaying expectations publicly.
Yeah, the presence of both Rubio and Kellogg suggests the U.S. is paying very close attention, wants to be fully briefed, even if they're being cautious in their public statements. It shows this conflict is still a major U.S. focus.
Okay, turning to Ukraine, what are they saying? Their delegation head laid out some pretty clear conditions to even start moving towards peace.
Yes, 3 main points. An immediate 30-day ceasefire. That's number 1. Then, the return of all abducted Ukrainian children. And third, a full exchange of all prisoners of war.
These feel like, basic humanitarian starting points.
Absolutely. They directly address the immediate human cost for Ukraine, the children issue, the POWs. Those are incredibly sensitive, huge sticking points for any kind of future reconciliation you'd imagine.
Definitely. Deeply emotional and critical issues.
Now, on the Russian side, the message is, okay, they say they want a diplomatic end too. They're ready to talk about a ceasefire.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
Yeah, a big one here. They voiced major reservations. Their main worry seems to be that Ukraine would just use any ceasefire, any pause, to regroup its forces, maybe mobilize more troops.
And get more advanced weapons from the West.
Exactly. Which just speaks volumes about the level of mistrust, right? It's that classic security dilemma playing out.
It absolutely is. Anything one side does for its security, the other sees as a threat. It just feeds the cycle. Russia's concern about Ukraine getting stronger during a pause, that's clearly shaping their whole approach to these talks.
Which leads us right into this core problem, the mutual distrust. It's palpable. Ukraine and its allies, they keep accusing Putin of just stalling, of not being serious about peace at all.
And the optics don't help, do they? Putin proposed the talks in Turkey, but then he declined to meet Zelensky himself.
Right, he sends mid-level officials instead. And Ukraine basically responded in kind, sending similar-level negotiators.
That reciprocal move, lowering the representation level, it's very telling. It suggests neither side really expected or perhaps even wanted major breakthroughs from this initial meeting. Keeping the top leaders away signals caution, maybe hedging bets.
And let's look back a bit. The historical context. Russia is apparently trying to frame these talks as a continuation of those ones back in early 2022.
The first Istanbul talks, yeah.
Yeah.
Right after the invasion.
But that framing seems to be a huge problem for Ukraine. Why is looking back to 2022 so difficult for them now?
Well, the crucial difference is the situation on the ground. It's completely changed. Back then, Ukraine was fighting for its immediate survival. The threat felt existential in a different way.
Right.
The terms reportedly discussed then, things like major cuts to Ukraine's military, are just, unthinkable for Kyiv now, given that Russia occupies nearly a fifth of their territory.
So going back to those terms would mean negotiating from a much, much weaker position compared to even then.
Exactly. The battlefield realities, the territory Russia now holds, it completely changes Ukraine's leverage and perspective. They see revisiting those early 2022 ideas as totally unacceptable now.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And explains why Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, was so quick to reject any link between these talks and those failed ones from before. The starting point today is just fundamentally different.
Precisely. Ukraine's position now has to reflect the current map, the sacrifices made since February 2022. They're not going to negotiate based on the situation from over 3 years ago.
And speaking of positions, Putin's core demands, they haven't really budged, have they? Still insisting Ukraine cede territory.
Significant territory, yeah.
Abandon any hope of joining NATO and commit to being neutral. These are, fundamental demands. They hit right at Ukraine's sovereignty, its future direction.
They are. They reflect Russia's long-held strategic goals, especially concerning NATO and what Moscow sees as its own security sphere.
But for Ukraine, obviously, these demands are, the sources say tantamount to capitulation. They've totally rejected them.
Understandably so, from their perspective.
And instead, their focus seems to be on getting strong security guarantees from other countries, especially the U.S. That's a completely different security model they're aiming for.
A fundamentally different approach, yes. Seeking external guarantees rather than forced neutrality.
When we talk about security guarantees, what does that actually mean in practice? Is it like a mini NATO, a mutual defense pact?
It could take different forms. It usually involves commitments from guarantor nations to provide support, military, economic, diplomatic, if Ukraine is attacked again. Not necessarily a full Article 5 type treaty like NATO, but something designed to be a credible deterrent and provide real security.
Okay. And then we just have to touch on the human cost, the ongoing fighting. It's horrific. This sources paint this picture of just deep hostility, a grinding, endless-seeming war.
The numbers are just awful. Hundreds of thousands killed or wounded on both sides, soldiers, thousands of Ukrainian civilians dead, cities destroyed, millions displaced.
It's almost impossible to really comprehend the scale of the tragedy.
It really is. And that suffering just hangs over everything, underscoring why a resolution is so desperately needed, even if it looks incredibly difficult right now. The scars from this will last generations.
Russia, meanwhile, keeps citing NATO expansion as the reason for its special military operation. They insist any deal has to address these root causes, as they call them.
While Ukraine and its allies say that's just a false pretext.
Yeah, a cover for an imperial-style land grab.
Yeah.
These narratives are just completely opposed. How do you even start to bridge that gap?
It's incredibly hard when both sides have such fundamentally different stories about why this is happening and what it's about. Finding common ground for negotiation is exceptionally challenging.
We also got a glimpse of the current military situation from Ukraine's army chief, General Suski. He estimates something like 640,000 Russian troops are in Ukraine now.
Yeah, a huge number. He described it as a brutal war of attrition with fighting all along that massive front line.
And it's not abstract. Just before these talks started, there were reports Russia took another village in the east.
And air raid sirens and explosions in Dnipro.
Right. So this diplomacy, it's happening while the violence is still very much active. Territory is still changing hands.
Exactly. Those realities on the ground constantly influence the talks, the leverage, the positions. It's not happening in a vacuum.
So, okay, wrapping up this deep dive on the Istanbul talks. The big takeaways seem to be, 1, direct talks are back after a very long, very bloody gap. That's something.
In itself, yes, it's a notable development, reestablishing that channel.
But 2, the obstacles are massive. Expectations for any kind of real breakthrough right now, extremely low.
Decidedly low, yeah. The hurdles are immense.
And 3, both sides have laid out their starting positions, but they're fundamentally miles apart on the core issues.
That's a good summary. Deep mistrust, conflicting goals, the ongoing war. It all adds up to a very challenging road ahead.
Still, as you said earlier, maybe it's a necessary first step.
Yeah.
Even if it feels small and tentative right now, just opening that door again.
Precisely. Dialogue, even when you disagree profoundly, keeps the possibility of a negotiated outcome alive. It's often the essential starting point, however far off the end might seem.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given everything we've talked about, especially how much the military map has changed since 2022, how might those shifting realities on the ground ultimately force a change in what a future peace deal could even look like? Forget the stated demands for a second. What compromises, however painful or politically toxic they seem now, might just become unavoidable down the line if this grinding war continues. It's a pretty heavy question to end on.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll.